Let's start by just having everyone introduce themselves and how you are related to our world of blockchain. Let's start with you, Steve.
Good morning, Jimmy, and good morning, New York. Thanks for having us. I'm Steve Lawrence, the president of EHR Data. I'll get into what EHR Data is about in a little bit, but we're connected to the BSV blockchain to try to create a patient's data record and write that to the blockchain. Obviously, BSV is the only alternative with the scalability and the low fees. So we're anxiously looking forward to being able to bring providers better information so they can make better decisions at lower costs for healthcare.
Zachary Weiner, founder of VXPass. Been a software engineer for going on 20 years now. I've worked for very large and very small companies, from the cloud to IoT and intercoms. I found myself looking for new ways to build after having built on Ethereum for about 3 years. And in a project, I found first BCH, and then I found BSV. And if I'm being totally honest here, I actually overshot BSV and tried a couple of other chains, and I had to come back because without naming them, they didn't do what they promised, and they didn't support what we on this stage wanted to achieve. So my journey was maybe a little different than the rest of theirs, but from a technical perspective, there was no other option.
Phil.
Excuse me. My name is Phil Runyan. I am the co-founder and managing director of Veridat. My trajectory in this space is not too far from Zach's. About 3 years ago, we went down the path of looking at solutions for fair gameplay in the gaming world. And I had to walk away from blockchain technology. What we needed, the high throughput, low cost, just wasn't there. The market wasn't ready for it. And it was through my now business partner, Dr. Robert Huber, who encouraged me to take a look at the market again. He had a contract research organization that needed a highly scalable blockchain for the information that they created from pre-clinical trials, so early R&D. And I first laughed at him. I said, good luck. And they said, just take a look. And so I reached out to a fellow BSVer, David Case, who from Chronoverse, who said, you know what, we ran into the same problem with Ethereum. I totally feel your pain. You should really look at BSV. We're building on it right now for our project, Crypto Fights, and it's everything you're looking for and then some. And as it turns out, he was not wrong.
Okay. Kip.
Hi, I'm Kip Wolf, and I'm a technologist with a passion for data integrity. I've been a management consultant to the life sciences industry since the mid-90s, and occasionally have taken roles inside industry in leadership during periods of significant transformational change, particularly mergers and acquisitions, when inside Wyeth pre-Pfizer merger and inside Merck post-sharing merger, in both cases running business process management groups with an exit strategy. And I'm currently the head of technology or technical operations and portfolio management at X-Vax Technology. And X-Vax is a preclinical virtual biotech company, and we are focused on the development of vaccines against pathogens that are acquired by mucosal infection, particularly herpes. And being virtual, we've got a lot of challenges that I think blockchain can solve, but I'm personally very interested in blockchain to disrupt many of the traditional life science business operations as a critical success factor for data integrity.
Fantastic. We're going to dig into examples of how some of your companies are actually using blockchain technology. So I'm going to start with Phil. Phil, why don't you explain to us exactly what your Veridat platform does, in particular its use in the pharmaceutical industry, and we have this diagram of your workflow.
Correct. So this diagram is particular to Juvatech. Again, I mentioned them, Dr. Robert Huber's contract research organization. What we found, or what we've found over time, I should say, is that the data which is created from the pharmaceuticals that we consume, there's a lot of hands that touch the data. A lot of times it's not even digital. You have two people reviewing things. And in the world of electronic data, as things are stored in databases, they can be easily deleted. They can be edited. There are human errors. It's not always that somebody is out to get one over on the man or get into market faster. Stupid things happen. It just does. And so because of Robert's very novel approach, in utilizing fruit flies in high-throughput behavioral phenotyping for identifying drug targets, he said, look, we really needed the data to be so far beyond questionable. We needed to use a blockchain for this. And so this is an example of the workflow where you have this feeding assay, which then goes into their own analytics tools. And then from there, as data is created in real time, We capture that before anybody can muck with the data, before it can be played with, before it can be teased. We capture that. We create a digital twin of that hash, or as we call it, a digital twin. That then goes up to BSV. We then pull down information that's specific to that block and store it within our own record, or in this case, his electronic lab notebook. At the very end of a trial that runs, we then also run another, we capture the data, which also is derived from that trial. We update the record, which then shows the provenance of where it started and where it ended. Every update to this data that is made, every new save state, also is tied to the original record, which then again allows for ironclad data provenance.
Got it. And do you have any clients using this platform now?
We do. We have a large pharmaceutical partner right now with another one on deck. As one can imagine, the world of pharmaceuticals and the size of these companies, they are less concerned about being poster children for our brands. But I can tell you that they're happy with the service as it is so far. And maybe someday in the near decade, we can actually get our white paper out of their publishing office.
All right. Fantastic. All right, let's move to Zach to talk about everyone's favorite topic here in New York City, vaccine passes for COVID, as well as other verified health records.
Yeah, so we actually don't call them a COVID pass or a vaccine pass at all. Although the name is VX Pass, we build verified health records. And so how an individual, a corporation, or an organization might want to use that record is up to them. But I think one of the themes you'll see across everybody on the stage here in this panel is trust. The way that this works is a doctor writes a record in much the same way that they write your name down on that COVID card. It may be a medical practitioner, a nurse practitioner, something of the like. But no matter what, the record not only does not contain your ID, right? So we don't store your name, your birthday, your social, any of those things that are generally associated with a medical record. We use a digital signature provided by the BSV JavaScript code to allow users, the patient, to prove that they own a record rather than running via a lookup. And so for the patient, that means that if VXPass were to be exposed or there were some quote-unquote data breach, their identities are not at risk. And we've taken a very similar approach to writing as much as we can in plain text to prove to everybody who views these records exactly how clean and show everything that's stored so that there's no questions.
Got it. And do you want to explain who
I'd
some
be
of your
happy
partnerships
to.
are?
So like Phil just said, in the vaccine manufacturing process, there's a lot of opportunity for companies like ours. We've begun working with partnerships to verify the test results of things beyond COVID. That might be STIs or STDs. We've started working with a pharmaceutical manufacturer to ship these tokens, these records, from the point of manufacture through the transit process to the end practitioner, and then following it into people's arms. We've started working with buildings, with other companies on this stage, for either access or partnership. And we've started working with the largest organizations in the world that cover finance, World Health, and many of the African nations in Southern and Western Africa.
Yeah, and you mentioned it at our last conference, but how's the project with Lesotho going?
It's actually going better than it was at the last project. At the last conference. When you sell to governments or deal with providing services to governments, they generally move a lot slower than startups do. So I think maybe our expectations weren't quite in line with how the world works. But now that we've sort of learned our lessons, taken our licks, and reformed a plan that's with partnerships like the World Bank and potentially the WHO, it's helped us to understand and navigate the process that's needed to really make the impact in the area that we're looking to do.
Right. And for those of you who missed the last conference, Zach's company application has been selected to be the official application for tracking the COVID vaccine rollout in the country of Lesotho in the bottom of Africa.
Yes.
All right. Let's go to Kip. So going back to the question of data integrity, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, tell us about the kinds of issues your company faces with data integrity as it's exploring, pharmaceuticals, and how do you think blockchain technology can assist that?
So I think some of the challenges that have been mentioned already, Phil mentioned the bureaucracy, alluded to the bureaucracy in big pharma, right? And so much of that is because of the regulation that's appropriately applied to our life sciences industry. But what's exciting is blockchain's ability to kind of realize solutions rapidly. I've seen development happen very quickly. I like the API model that it can be laid on top of things rather than the large, arduous implementation plans that many of the life science companies like to take from a technology perspective. But what's exciting to me and why I've been passionate about blockchain is because of pharmaceutical or life sciences interest in what's essentially an audit trail. And so we know that as a distributed ledger, and we're realizing it in real time. What's exciting about BSV is the additional value of data on chain and the scalability. And then frankly, the bureaucracy that we talked about is really a barrier to entry. The pharmaceutical industry, life sciences industry is very resistant to change. Part of it is because of the regulation, but part of it is just because of these large corporations that in many cases are multinational, and there are a lot of JVs. There's a lot of M&A. Mergers and acquisitions is a business development model in our industry. And so I think the scalability with the monetization at an economical point is very, very important to breaking into that industry and in a pervasive way that can be disruptive. And I think we find opportunities beyond just supply chain. Obviously, supply chain solutions is clear. We'll talk more or hear more about that, I think, today or tomorrow. But I think there are other opportunities, particularly around testing, QC testing, obviously health records, and really speed to market. The development time is so long for these products that any efficiencies we can realize in the value chain can be realized in public health.
Yeah, and have you explored other blockchains and tried to evaluate what might be best for building any applications in your industry?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been following I haven't personally explored it. We're not personally using blockchain at X-Vax, and we're virtual. Some of our partners are considering blockchain solutions, but until BSV with some of the value, particularly data on chain, size of the block, and the scalability with the economics makes a lot of sense.
Steve, tell us what is the status of projects at EHR Data and how you are trying to help create global electronic health records for the world.
Yeah, so I mentioned before that EHR Data, our founder's vision was to create a global patient record before his passing. And we're a spinoff of a healthcare company for 40 years. So our entire employee base has lived in healthcare, so we know all about the privacy laws and everything. And the goal really is to make all of us in this room that are watching that are consumers of healthcare, we all know the challenges of healthcare, and the providers, the physicians, and the clinicians that interface with us have the same challenge. They make decisions based on the data they have and the information they have available to them. And what we see is that the information about us, the consumers, lives in disparate systems across the entire healthcare network. And so our goal is through a database that we've built and some permissioned APIs to be able to go into providers who are going at risk at the cost of the patient's healthcare to collect all the data. And even those people have most of the data on us, but it's still in disparate systems and the providers can't make the right decisions. And so we're going to collect all that data and present that to the provider at the time of care so they can make a better decision and ultimately lower cost. And then where blockchain really comes in is if I'm a payer or a manufacturer or an insurance company, or even there's physician groups that go at risk, if I can get you to lower your healthcare costs, that's pure profit in my pocket because I'm getting a per diem per month. So what they're wanting to do is be able to incent people for better behavior. So diabetes is a simple one. If you can lower your A1C, I may incent you. And so we can use the BSV blockchain for incentivizing patients for better behavior to lower their healthcare cost. And it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, well, you know how I like a win. But you do that with BSV micropayments, right, or tokens
Yes.
you might build?
Yeah, in the customers we've talked to, it's a little bit of both. It'd be micropayments. Some want to use tokens, and we'll leave that up to them and let them create the use case that they want.
Got it. So Kip, the theme of this conference is it's about time. I want to focus on the digital timestamping use of blockchain technology. How do you think that will help satisfy regulator concerns with data integrity for pharmaceuticals?
I think the timestamp is really the key component in blockchain that provides value to life science solutions. As I said, audit trail is something life sciences is very familiar with. It's a term used regularly. It's what brought me to the industry with a regulation that became effective in August of 1997 that everyone in life sciences is intimately familiar with. It's been around for some time, and the industry is still struggling with meeting the obligations and interpreting it. And I think The distributed nature of the ledger and the ease of implementation through API, and the fact that we don't need to install a lot of technology. It's not a large footprint installation. I think are all key enablers to implementation. There are some barriers, as I said, with bureaucracy and regulation, but if we can lead with the timestamp, that will resonate. If we can lead with ease of implementation, and if we can lead with kind of paying for itself, not literally, but the economics of the monetization is very, very important. And it lays over everything that's existing. So companies that are virtual and significant partnerships can rely on those timestamps rather than trying to arbitrarily apply them manually along the way.
Yeah, it's proving to regulators this particular data set existed at this date and moment in time. Right. Phil, you've talked to regulators and actually presented about Veridat to people at the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, right? So please tell us about that.
Excuse me. Well, there was a very long pause at the very end of the presentation. It was a little uncomfortable, as I think everybody was trying to digest what just happened the previous 30 minutes. They were very receptive to it. The government, up into that conversation I had with them, the FDA specifically, which is a subgroup within the FDA, they look at adulteration of pharmaceuticals. And they had used it as a file server. And when you respond to somebody in text, you write LOL, you're not really laughing out loud. Well, I actually did that on camera. I literally laughed out loud, and I'd apologize quickly. I was like, sorry, I had never thought it to be something so simple as just a file server. But they gave me a pass on that. At the end of the day, this idea of having a immutable timestamp ledger, it's basically like having 1,000 notaries. So every time you do something, they all look at it and go, yeah, that happened. And these are not people that you're necessarily paying. It's on a public ledger. It's accessible to anybody. And this concept to them was a little foreign. They were comfortable with private blockchains. I'm sure you'll hear a lot about Hyperledger, right? Is a really good example. The problem, though, is that nobody wants to own their own blockchain. Even the government doesn't want to own their own blockchain. They're a pain in the ass, and they're expensive to be able to maintain. Even though our government does love to spend money on frivolous and stupid things, I don't foresee this as one that is going to work for them, and I think they realize this. So it's the idea again of a public, immutable timestamp ledger to be able to validate the state of data and show again ironclad provenance, like this thing actually occurred, and these were all the iterations of it. That was I feel like it was very appealing to them. It was very well received, which is also how I met Kip. It was from that conversation. I was invited to speak with the GAMP ISPE group, and ISPE is the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers. Okay, perfect. Nailed it. And so, it's brought in a lot of conversations about blockchain as far as the government is concerned, and they're certainly open to this concept. It's, again, from a bureaucracy perspective, it's how do we do this with as little lift as humanly possible.
Zach, let's go back to your commentary about how you overshot BSV and ended up back. Can you tell us, from your experience now having explored different ledger or blockchain platforms to build your product, what have you been seeing as the reasons that BSV has best powered your verified healthcare record capabilities?
Well, I think there's a very interesting developer community in BSV. And you probably won't find it on Twitter or Reddit, where you might, some of these other developer communities that we're used to. Being a developer, I actually found my way there through GitHub and through some source code. I found myself in a private group in a Slack channel where once I got into the channel, everybody became much more open. And so I got to ask some questions and learn to understand why BSV was much better than something like IPFS. IPFS is distributed file storage for anybody who might not know. And for companies that want to have control over their data, potentially control over their files, but also have them in a publicly verifiable space, something that goes awry, I won't say down, but awry at the volume that IPFS does, it can't support enterprise. And so as I started to see some of these more technical glitches that you might not get if you're just a spender of the coin or buying an NFT or something, it became very apparent that if I were going to build a business on at least two of these other platforms, one, either the fees would have been too high and variable, so there would be no opportunity to actually pitch at a fixed cost. When you deal with governments, that's kind of mandatory. And second was, if you can't access the data when you need it, what good is it? So as I started to roll back, if I'm being totally honest, at the time, this was, I guess, mid-2020, there was just a lot more written about BCH, right? There was just a lot more that you could find when you Google Bitcoin or Bitcoin forks. But the tooling and the tool set allowed me to literally test both chains against each other. And there was no comparison at the end of the day between speed and cost. And since we're operating a business here that needs to run on margin and needs consistency, BSV was the option.
Yeah, reliability and speed and cost, very important for business planning. Steve, what kind of clients or business partners has EHR Data been exploring, and who out there in our virtual world should come up and contact you and talk to you?
Well, the most interest we've had is from, as I said before, people that are at risk for cost of healthcare. Those being some payers, so in the U.S. there are MAPD plans, some ACOs and IDNs. There's physician groups that are at risk. And so those are the ones that really we've been talking to. We met several down in Miami. We met several at the last New York meeting. So those people are the ones that really need a tool to bring the patient's data in one place. You would think that they would have that stuff, but the systems that they use have their own needs. They have to do billing, they have to do scheduling, they have to do all the other things. They really don't have a place where they can go and see the patient's total healthcare record in one place. And so our utility will fit right in front of their EMR systems and build basically a patient data lake where all the providers can have access to that and see the data lake and see your entire history of healthcare information. And obviously, if you have that in front of you, you can make a much better decision as a healthcare provider. And so those are the people that we're seeing the most interest from.
Yeah, and it's especially important here in the United States where we don't have a national healthcare system as other countries do. So, my medical data, my primary care physician is different than my dentist, and different from the labs, and different from the pharmacy. And so it's hard to get together.
If you don't have the entirety of your record, it's very difficult to consider yourself a sovereign health consumer. Right? How do you make the right decisions about your body? Or how do you expect doctors to help you make the right decisions about your physiology if they're missing data?
Kip, let's go back to you. Phil mentioned your work with the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering, and there's a blockchain special interest group. Could you tell us about what that organization does and how it's exploring use of blockchain technology in the field of life sciences?
Yes, thank you. So the ISPE group is a blockchain special interest group, and it's really gathering industry professionals like myself that have an interest in blockchain. It's a pretty large group now. It started a few years back, and there were only 20 or 30 of us. But it's a very large group of folks from industry that have an interest in, if not working in blockchain in their respective companies, maybe in the IT department and things like that. But it's a kind of a captive audience where we talk about leading innovations in blockchain and look for opportunities for proofs of concept. So if you have an interest in life sciences, have ideas you'd like to apply, connect with me, talk with me, and I'd be happy to see if there's an opportunity to get you in front of that group. It's a captive audience, as I said, of industry professionals. They pay to play. It's a membership-oriented group. But we have speakers come in that talk about solutions. That's how I met Phil. And Philip presented a great solution to a group of folks that said, hey, maybe we can talk about a proof of concept, connect with companies that are interested in investing a little bit to see how this technology works.
Great. Now let's talk about an issue that I always get asked about when I talk about healthcare data on blockchain, patient privacy, the privacy of data. How do your platforms manage that? Because that's something everyone is concerned about, including legal compliance with things such as HIPAA and GDPR requirements. Steve.
Yeah, so the actual healthcare data is written off-chain and kept off-chain, and we write a hash to the chain so that we get the immutability of it. I mean, you don't want anybody messing with your healthcare data, and you want to be able to audit it and make sure it's accurate. And so we write a hash to the chain to make sure that it's auditable, but the actual HIPAA information and privacy is held off-chain within all of our systems, and they're built with all the HIPAA standards, and we can comply with all the international privacy laws that exist today.
So I actually don't store your personally identifiable information at all. At the base level, if you want to sign up to get a VX Pass, you don't need to give us your email address, your phone number, your social security number, your health ID or insurance card, any of that. And
What do I give you? What kind of information do I give you?
So we do write to the chain everything about the dose of vaccination that you received. And then in addition to that, we create a digital signature based around the data that was included, and then a second digital signature that it can be proven that an individual's name was that name at the time of the record. So you can prove you own it without it being queryable or written at all to the chain.
Got it. Phil, you probably don't have to deal with this issue quite as much as the other gentleman.
Well, thankfully, blood gas analyzers don't have any GDPR requirements. They're not real people. But ultimately, some spaces that we are moving into very rapidly is in the clinical stages, clinical trial stages of identifying therapies. And that means real people are getting real drugs injected or taken orally or whichever way it needs to go down. And that will require the ability to store data. But how we handle the data is the same thing of whether we're doing a vi-cell counter or if we're doing real live patient data, which is just like everybody else. That information is stored in a compliant manner, offline, off-chain, excuse me. And from there, we create hashes of data, one direction. So you can't re-engineer it. You can't go, oh, I've got this, this SHA-256 hash, and magically now I have all of your personal information. It doesn't work like that. That's the information that actually gets stored on chain.
Kip, one of the questions we always get asked is whether or not public chains such as BSV are better to be used than a permissioned ledger, which is controlled by some forces. What's your thoughts on that in terms of how blockchain technology can satisfy regulator concerns with respect to data integrity?
So I think there's a real opportunity right now to interrogate these topics with health authorities. And those health authorities regulate the life science industry around the world. In the US, it's the US FDA. And the reason why I believe it's a ripe time to discuss this is because traditionally life sciences have been keen to default to closed systems, not open systems, private, not public data, on-prem, not in cloud, and they just default there. But the reason that it's a ripe time to strike on this is because of cell and gene therapy, in my opinion. So cell and gene therapy relies on the ability to interpret, not explain the results, right? Things come out of, modify, and go back into your body, and we can interpret, but maybe not explain the results. And lo and behold, health authorities are approving cell and gene therapies. So I'm using that correlation to say, look, if we can approve it in a therapy, let's approve it in the technology related to those therapies. And so think black box, right? So if we can say, look, public, we know you have an aversion to public, but if we can show public protection of privacy data, public accessibility, which outweighs some of the risk, and talk about the economies of scale, I think we really have an opportunity to present a value proposition now to health authorities.
Great. Let's talk now, Steve and Zach, about your efforts to really try to use your technology to empower patients to have more power over their own data. How can we do this? How do we help the people out there actually feel like they have power over their healthcare data?
It's a great question, and it's filled with a lot of landmines. I mean, everybody in healthcare wants to own its own little piece of data, and that's some of the problems that we have today. And we, the consumers of healthcare, it's really our data. I mean, no government agency's ever argued that it's your data, but they do argue, is it a physician's, or is it the pharmacy, or is it the manufacturer's data?
Usually the collector of data that typically owns it.
Our whole goal is to collect it and give it to the patient. So as they move from provider to provider, if they change insurance companies, if they move from the East Coast to the West Coast, if they're traveling from London to New York, they can take that with them. And if they see a new provider, they can have a QR code that their EMR system can scan and download their complete information. So we want to give them control of their data ultimately, so that, again, when they see a new provider, that provider can have all the information and make the best decision.
Zach.
So how can patients start to benefit from owning their data, I think is the question on the table here. You, in the camera, you call your doctor right now and say, are you signed up for VXPass? Do it right now. No, but seriously, we have to actually start by beginning to own our data. And in a lot of cases, when you're talking about medicine or healthcare, the type of data we're talking about is enormous. Right, so the lift, as has been mentioned here, to either change a system or integrate a new system is not just difficult, but tedious, right? It takes a lot of actors, there's a lot of relationship building, back and forth, integration stuff. And so, that's part of why I tried to keep VXPass so simple, is because it's already very difficult to convince people to make a change from something that's already working. But the easy way is to start with small chunks of data. Small little bits of data that are valuable to you as an individual that might not be valuable to the society writ large or even to your neighbor. And by doing that, we can start to build that small foundational layer of new trust that can be built upon, like a foundation for a building where, in the beginning, you only have concrete. And that's all you're paying attention to as an individual. But then you can build one story. And from there, you can add some steel and build 4, 5, 7 stories. So we got to start small. We got to find the easiest places to start to own the things that are associated with us that may not have been in our ownership previously. And the way to do that is by asking for it.
And Steve, very quickly, your platform is also designed to empower patients to monetize their data, so that if a company such as Kip's company is wanting to get information about sample patients who are taking some medication, right, they could actually use your platform to essentially pay, and you distribute through BSV micropayments to people who are involved, including the patient.
Yes, so they can sign up. Clinical trials are a perfect example. When you go to a new provider, and they give you a clipboard, why give you a clipboard? They could just simply electronically send you all their information, their address, all that stuff, and get micropayments for that, because that saves the provider many, many hours of time, all that labor of typing things in when you can simply electronically transfer all the data. It is 2021, almost 2022. Why we aren't electronically transferring healthcare data is beyond all of our imagination.
Yeah, and Kip, would you be interested in using a platform like that if you could actually pay to get access to patients' data if they authorize it?
Yeah, I think that would be very useful.
All right, let's wrap up by having you all quickly just tell us what's next for your companies and what would you like to see for use of blockchain in healthcare. Phil.
So while we may have started Veridat with an eye on the pharmaceutical industry, specifically in R&D, we are finding a lot of other industries approaching us. The cannabis and hemp industry is very interested in what we're doing right now. FinTech, later today you'll hear from Dennis Schroeder from SaraScript, who is now bringing the power of BSV to SharePoint users. 200 million people utilize SharePoint. It is the world's largest collaborative platform. They've utilized Veridat as a means of enhancing their document workflow, as well as short and long-term storage, which maintains HIPAA and FINRA compliance. So where we started is not necessarily where we're finding ourselves ending up. It doesn't mean that we don't love this industry and that we won't continue to see it through. There's so many, there's a lot of interest in this space, and it's really great to have somebody come up and go, hey, I've got an idea. What do you think about this for this industry? It's like, great, yes, let's do it.
And we'll hear from Dennis later in the conference. Kip, what's next for your company, and how might you like to see use of blockchain?
Well, we're always focused on data integrity because, as I said, we're a preclinical virtual company. So our intent all along was to look at a transaction down the road whenever that would occur. But we're very interested at all times in making sure that our data is secure, defensible, time-stamped. That's our only asset at this point, being preclinical. We're working at getting into the clinic. So everything we work in is data value, right? So it's a keen topic for us.
Zach.
Well, there are about 2.2 billion childhood vaccinations given every year. We don't have accurate numbers as to how many of them are actually recorded, but a large percentage go unrecorded. So the first next step for VXPass is to move away from COVID and to start documenting childhood vaccinations. What the audience may not know is that in some developing nations, there are many children that get inoculations twice or 3 times for the same pharmaceutical, and it's simply because they don't have a record. But I think from a business perspective, what's probably a little more exciting from the profitability is actually during our last New York conference, the administration, the presidential administration of the United States, issued a mandate for companies over 100 employees that have to provide vaccination records to their employer. Employers should not be holding your health data. And so VXPass has created an enterprise system to basically take any, or go into any enterprise organization and help to document this at the patient level, but also help with the coming OSHA compliance, right? To avoid those fines, fees, and other laborious, paper-intensive things that come along with OSHA.
Conflicting challenges for employers.
Yeah.
All right, Steve.
Yeah, so we're just a couple months away from commercialization, so we're excited about hopefully the next CoinGeek in March. We'll actually have some clients up here and talk about how we're using it, and You know, our whole goal is to see that first micropayment to a patient for their data or for improving their healthcare outcomes. So once we see that, then I think no telling where it'll take us.
Great. I know you've got some exciting things in the pipeline, and we'll look forward to hearing about that. So let's give a round of applause to all of our panelists for this really insightful exploration of healthcare, life sciences, and blockchain.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, MetaNet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today, but what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.